Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be interviewing Sam Rebelein. He is the author of Edenville, which is his debut horror novel. It will be arriving in the United States on October 3rd.
And in the UK, I think on October 9th. So we have two flavors for you here today. The US cover is a nice little sunflower, and the UK cover is a nice little spider.
Blood spider.
Yeah, blood spider. For all you fans of blood spiders at home. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. We were talking a bit about it before. I've been working on this world for, I think from like initial conception to publication, it will have been like 6 full years. And I feel sort of bad. I'm like totally just diving into a conversation that we had before.
It's fine, yeah.
But I feel sort of bad because there were 3 main stories that I wanted to tell that I ended up mashing together into one book. And there were different elements of each that I thought worked, but on their own, they weren't, like, they kept boring me. And so I just kept losing sight of what I wanted to say, and I would have pages and pages of stuff that I was just like, I don't know what, this is so dull, like, who gives a shit? The first story was this girl in college. She's like a sophomore in college, and she has this very antagonistic professor. And so I had this villain that I really liked. And then I had this story about this relationship between these 2 people, Cam and Quinn. And I knew what I wanted their emotional arcs to be, but I didn't have a plot that like drove them forward to those places, right? So, and then a third story that was sort of the world and, other worlds that I wanted to tell that were attached to that one, other worlds that I wanted to tell stories about. And so I sort of mushed those 3 things together, and I felt bad initially because so many elements of those stories fell by the wayside as I was trying to weave them all together. And there's this anxiety that I have that it's like not even the book that I really wanted to write, or it's like not correct or something, just because it's changed so much.
So you're saying that the inception of this novel obviously changed over time, but in such a different way that it is now something completely different from what you imagined at first?
Yeah, which is scary because that's really me. I'm really talking about me. When I started writing this book, I was in my early 20s, and I really wanted to tell like melancholy stories that had a point, like I was saying stuff by telling like real life stories. And I was sort of interested in horror, like I really liked horror movies, and so originally the story of this relationship between these 2 people, Cam and Quinn, was this sort of melancholy, like it was just their relationship. And that was in some way going to be the driving force of the book, and I just kept getting stuck because I was like, I don't know what's pushing them to like what is driving the book besides their emotional states? What's more interesting that sort of encases that? And so when the pandemic hit, then I was spending a lot of time going back and revisiting old stories that I loved, and I realized that the stories that really meant something to me when I was growing up were like adventures and romps. They had peril and danger, but also a lot of humor and heart. And so over time, I think the novel got zanier and zanier and more fun. And the point really shifted from like, here's something I'm trying to really like, I'm dedicating the story to saying this thing. It shifted from that into like, I don't fucking know. It's just a good time. Which is really like, feels odd because that feels like the opposite way that I sort of thought I would move through life. Like you would get more serious as you got older, but I've gotten less serious. So I just like, it's just been sort of surprising. And there's that twinge of like, well, then it's not right. It's not like, it's some immature bullshit, But I think so many writers just say like, if you're writing a story that high school you could be excited about or like engage with or find comfort in any way, then if that's what you've written, then you've done a good job. You know, you're just trying to write something that is a shout into the void to you when you were really listening to the void, right? And like, you know, when you're 17, you're constantly in flux. You're changing all the time. And so you're looking for things to ground you. And so I think that's why that's such a like nice target audience, because you're like, what would this book help ground me in some way when I'm 17? You know, even like, you know, I was 17 when I was really into like Watchmen, and I was discovering like H.P. Lovecraft and stuff like that. And even though those stories aren't like saying something, you know, they're not like, I'm a story that has a metaphor, you know, but they still do present a worldview and philosophies that I think I could really get behind when I was 17, you know, like Watchmen, like even if your story isn't like, you have a particular point you're trying to make, the events that happen in your story and the way they unfold still say something about how you view the world and the way it should be, right? Like, depending on who saves the day and how they save the day, you're presenting a moral view of the world and like who your villains are and how you present them. Like it all feeds into messages that we're absorbing, right? And I think in general, that's a reckoning that we're having in a lot of ways just in our own like cultural lives and the content that we're consuming now. It's like we historically, these have been our heroes and villains. How do we shift that, right? As we're shifting a lot of, or trying to shift a lot of the ways that we look at each other in general, you know? So that was a very long, rambly way of saying, like, we got a lot to talk about.
Well, I've got a simple layup question for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite part of, what are you most excited for people to read in this book?
There are a number of things. I think I would like people to come out of it having had a good time, you know, like that sort of haunted house rush where you come out the other end and you're like, oh man, you know, that was fun.
I definitely had that experience reading this.
Yeah.
Because having read through the whole thing with you, which was really, that was a really special thing to do. With my wife and our best friend Vin, like all of us reading it together and doing the voices, it just was, the first thing I realized about it was how much fun it was. It's just a blast.
Thanks,
the characters are always interesting because they're not taking themselves so seriously, because they're not trying to, you know, live in this melancholy, dour world of, it's horrible and everything's maggots and worms and we're all gonna die and you know the government's betrayed you, you know,
Yeah.
which is like,
Which is sort of Watchmen.
Yeah.
It's like aliens and the
Sure.
government. You know?
right.
Like,
But then you get like, you know, Night Owl, who's this guy that just, you know, can't, you know, get excited in bed, and he's a very normal, you know,
Yeah.
beautiful character who's you know, vulnerable. Anyway, the point is that there's heart even there, but your novel is suffused with heart. There's heart all over it. Even in the scariest moments, the grossest moments, the moments that made me literally go like this, like I had to pull on my skin because I couldn't stand it. It was still, I could hear you chuckling while we were reading it. And,
Cool. Yeah.
and even when I, you know, read it at home, I can hear that voice in your head having fun. I can hear this little Sam being like, isn't that great? You know?
Yeah, because I think, you know, I really started in theater, and I started especially with comedy. I did improv for a long time. I did sketch comedy for years, and then finally put on a horror play and got the whole audience to scream at one point. And that was when I was really like, okay, that felt more challenging. Like, I feel like I have made people laugh, you know, a few times, and that's great. And I know that I can do that. This is cool though, you know, this is great. And I think that a lot of people have that sort of like, even if you don't write horror or like scary things, everyone like hides behind a wall and goes boo to your friend, like at some point, right? Everybody at least a little bit has that drive to like, haha, yeah, gotcha. And so I think that horror and comedy work the same way, that you have the release of some like chest energy, right? Whether it's a scream or a gasp or a laugh or whatever, you're still releasing that whatever chakra that is.
That
right?
anxiety.
Yeah.
That's storing up here.
Yeah, in the heart, right? And you're getting that energy out. And so I always think of horror as bits, right? When you talk about comedy, you talk about things in terms of bits, like, oh, that's a good bit. But I think horror works the same way. Like if a dude's skinning himself alive and eating the pieces, like that's a pretty good bit, you know? So I just feel tickled. Like it's true what you say that like little Sam is just tickled by things that are interesting and cool and like creepy and kooky.
And he wants to share them, you know?
Yeah.
I can just tell that when I read the book that you just were so eager to share things that just gross us out, make us think. And it's not for this larger purpose of explaining, you know, the whole experience of life and what should be. It's just, thank God that there's a moment where we can just sit on a couch or on the beach or somewhere and read your book and just hang out with you, play with you, have fun, you know?
Yeah.
And I really do think we live in a world where everyone's concerned that their art is not super meaningful.
Yeah.
You know, and I say, you know, phooey on that. You know, I don't want to read your super meaningful piece. What I want to do is just enjoy where I am, and you know, if I think about things on my own that connect to your story and make me want to be a better person, I will.
Yeah.
You know, or I'll go read a book about becoming a better person. You
Yeah.
know, I'll go read a book about the environment. But
Right.
you know, but your story just perfectly threads that needle of being both meaningful because there's heart and also just a good old time.
Nice, man. Well, I'm glad, and it sort of spooked me when because like you said, we got you and your wife Kristen and our other friend Vin, and all four of us have done theater for years. You know, we're all actors and performers and whatever. We all got together and did the book. We did the book. We read through the book together because you should always read your work out loud, even if it's just like an important email and it's 2 paragraphs. Just read through it, like mutter it to yourself before you send it, just to get the flow of it. You really get a sense of your own voice then too, right? If you read some of your stuff out loud, some of your work or your poetry or your scripts or whatever, you get a sense of what your voice sounds like, which I think can be really empowering. But so we read through the whole thing, right? But even from the first chapter, I was spooked by how similar to you and Kristen, the 2 main characters, Cam and Quinn, felt. Like I could feel even in the vibe of the room. We were like, oh my God, this isn't about... Because I
remember I turned to you at one point and I was like, he's Cam's this, Cam's that, and Cam's that, and I'm this and that and that.
Yeah.
And you were literally like, I swear to God, I did not write this about you and your wife.
Yeah, because
you said that out loud.
Because we knew each other, but we didn't start hanging out until about a year ago, and the book was like mostly already in a complete form by then, right? So I was like, I swear this isn't about you. But I think if you're writing about stuff that is timeless and true, or true to you, you know, and essential in some way, rather than trying to be really specific or really preachy, people will resonate that. In ways that surprise you, people will resonate with that.
I think rather than me or Kristen identifying with the specifics of the characters, it was more that we were just so empathetic with them because they were so real, and they, like you said, the themes that they were going through were timeless rather than super specific. So we resonated with those timeless themes, and it felt like it was us, you know. And that honestly, that's a great horror protagonist. I need to really believe that Cam's a real person and that Quinn's a real person. Otherwise, I can't worry about them when, you know, they're about to have, you know, their eyes sucked out of their heads or whatever, you know, terrible things about to happen to them. And that's achieved here, 100%.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's that was one of the main drives too. Is like, how do I make these people sound like they're making realistic decisions, right? Every step of the way, like, and in every story like this, you hit a point where the characters are like, okay, like, what do we do? Like, how do we not leave? How are we stuck? And that was one scene in particular that I was really like, how do I make it as believable as possible that they stay in this place, right, and have to go down this path? Because Renfield County, where the book is set, is really a depression and a literal horror on the face of the earth. And I think that it rewards people who follow their gut. And so that was like the two sides of the coin of their relationship. Quinn is all about the heart and the gut, and she trusts herself, and she knows what she's about mostly. And Cam is just like, I think you put this really well before, but Cam is mostly like in his head.
He's
right?
ego.
He's all ego, right? And it just consumes him. And that's what the county, this place, this horror is looking to do for the people who have any kind of ego or hunger or power. Which is also sort of Lord of the Rings, like the ring will find any little crack and just radiate into it. And like, that's much of Frodo's journey through Fellowship of the Ring is like, I don't think I can be around anybody, because anyone who comes near this, like, even when he goes to talk to Galadriel, right, she has this moment where she's like, okay, I'm not gonna, if you could fuck off now, I'm gonna keep being Galadriel over here.
Right. I really love that about those. I'm glad you drew that that connection, because the Lord of the Rings movies, the books, and then of course the movies as an extension, they really give us this really sad and beautiful understanding of the fact that people we can be beautiful and good and still be attacked by that ego that wants, no, I want it. I really want it. Give it to me. And your Uncle Bilbo, he's been this lovely guy your whole life.
Yeah.
And he's gone on adventures and been a hero, and he's done great things. And yet, in a moment of weakness, you see him turn into a monster.
Yeah.
And then what does he do? He falls back. You can see he becomes an old man again, and he feels awful about having attacked his nephew like that.
Yeah, because we all do that. We're all susceptible to that, right?
All of us.
All have those moments where like, I'm so sorry I did that, right? And even the purest of heart, like Gandalf and Aragorn, both have moments where they look at the ring and they're like, no, thanks.
Don't give me that. Right, because I think Tolkien understood that within all of us is that power to do terrible things.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's all right. Don't hate that part of yourself. Mm-hmm. The whole experience watching that, especially that scene with Bilbo, is like, it's this sort of like forgiveness. It's like, hey, it's okay that you just did that. You're not, that's not you.
Yeah.
That's not the real you. That's that ego like we were talking about.
Right.
Just going nuts. And people so often say, no, that's me. I'm terrible. I have to stay away from you. I'm a bad person.
Well, and the other half of that too, I think that we're aware of that in ourselves and in each other enough that like the creepy feeling that we have about a place is so different from the creepy feeling that we have about people. If you walk by a creepy barn, you're very likely to be like, okay, I don't want to go in there, like whatever, we'll steer clear.
Right.
But if you have that same feeling about a person, I think people are much more likely to be like, oh, well, maybe he just had an off day or whatever. But you don't look at the barn and you're like, wow, its paint is peeling or whatever.
It's just having a bad day.
Yeah. Like, the place is the place. And it's interesting that we don't think about people in the same way, because we have this like, the negative side of that, right? That we have this belief that like people can change and whatever, but some people are just assholes, right? Like if we all have the power to be evil inside of us, some people have gollumed their way to just being a trash person, and like
and this is the thing about, again, the Lord of the Rings is like, why is he that way? It's because he decided to give into that part of himself as often as possible. But the real Gollum, the real character, who I forget his real name, I think it's Smeagol.
He still comes back. He's still in there, and he's still
in there.
Right. Yeah.
And really is the story of the fact that, all of us, our purity, it's in there. But the world, the soot, the ash of, Mordor corrupts us.
Yeah.
Takes us down, and we think that's us. And, all he has to do really is let go of that ring, wipe off that ash and soot, and maybe, go get a tan, whatever it is, a skincare routine, but he's going to be, the real him is hiding underneath all of that bullshit. Right. It's all there.
And, the real you is such a, weird thing to think about, because you're nothing. You're
nothing.
What even is you? You is, electricity and chemicals pumping through flesh, driving a mech suit of bone and skin, right? You are in a skull.
Said
right
a real horror novelist. Said like a true horror novelist. My interpretation of that has been, you are pure awareness.
Sure.
But I love this because this is the kind of rad shit that I would be talking about and into, when I was in high school, which is, yes, it's all just nerve signals and electricity.
Right.
So this person you're identifying with is completely made up.
Yeah, and think about it. Think about even the way that your cells are made and what you're composed of. I mean, really, you are rainwater and dinosaur pee and the cheese nips that you ate when you were 7. You're you're nothing. You're you are awareness. And I think that we do get stuck on those certain vibes that we can't stop being aware of, right? And you get stuck on those frequencies where you're like, I am Gollum. I am...
I'm terrible.
Yeah, right. And I think that it takes hard work and other people to show us that we can still be Smeagols,
Was there a sort of Gollum belief that you've had to let go of in your life? A sort of a core belief about yourself that you had to be like, wait a second, that's not me.
Yeah, many. That I'm still sort of shedding, as you go along. And then you find new ones, and then, old ones pop up again, and you're like, get out of here. But I think the main one for the book was just people will care about this. People will care about this story, and I think people will see the story that I was trying to tell. The negative reviews that I've obsessively read so far have all been because they're sort of positioning it as small town paranormal gothic horror. And so some people have read it under that lens and been like, I don't know what the fuck this is. What am I looking at, right? Because it's not exactly that. It's crazy small town romp with monsters and aliens and all kinds of shit, right? So I think just being okay with that and accepting that it wasn't this big serious thing that I wanted to write when I was 23 or thought that I wanted to write when I was 23, but instead it's a fun story that I think I would have been excited about when I was 17. Yeah, I don't know. What was your question?
That speaks to me because we are obsessed with doing the most important, most relevant, and most serious thing we can possibly do as creative people. We're, we fill our lives with these notions and dreams of being the one who finally accomplishes the great goals and is taken very seriously, and I think that's a mistake. I really do think it's a mistake to take yourself too seriously. I think you're just going to drive yourself crazy. I think the key to this joyful world is to play and play more and play again and keep playing and give people an opportunity to play. This is what these books are. This book, it's the same book with two different covers, but this book is play. This book is very much, one of my friends one time told me my favorite part about hanging out with our friend group, you know, you, me, and some other people, is that we allow them to become a child again, to be innocent again, to not worry so much about what needs to be done and how things are being done. And that's what your work does.
Cool. Thank you.
This brings me right back to being a kid again, and it's summer, and I'm going to see a blockbuster movie, and I just know I'm in for the best time.
Yeah, because I think, you know, I think there's just such anxiety in the air. You can even see in the way people drive a little bit differently. Like, we're all just like, everything's literally on fire. This country is insane. You know, we're hurtling towards disaster, and I just would like to chill out for a little bit. And at their base level, stories are just meant to pass the time and to instruct a little bit, right? Like, back in the day, we just hunted and gathered and fucking farmed and whatever. And then at night, when you couldn't do any of that, you would just sit around the campfire and tell stories and wait until dawn so you could wake up and do it again. And we've, like, bred ourselves into a corner with this whole, like, we have so many conveniences and so much shit that we don't have to hunt and gather for, that we're just overwhelmed by content trying to fill that space where we're just sitting around at home now, right?
100%.
And so, like, we also then in the Maslow's, what is it, like, hierarchy of needs, right? We're, like, at the pinnacle where we're like, okay, but how can we make our art as, like, the best art? You know, like, and it doesn't have to be that. It's just passing the time. It's just sharing a tale with, you know, a worldview or a moral or whatever. When I started reading, I never, like, as an 8-year-old, I wasn't like, I want to find a book that's about what's happening now.
The most boring 8-year-old in the world.
Yeah. But and that has never really changed, you know. I every so often have read a nonfiction book or a biography, but they're few and far between. Like, if I sit down and I'm reading a book, it's because I want to tune everybody out. And so hopefully, even though, you know, it does have things to say, Edenville, I hope, you know, does that.
It does. It tells me exactly. You know, again, I related to Cam, and Cam was obsessed with his, you know, having to be something. And I felt that way for so long in my life. And then watching Cam slowly have to let that go and just be Cam, that's something that you didn't hit me over the head with it. It was just a real person going through something real, and I connected to it and felt it powerfully.
Well, and that's Frodo too, right? I mean, Frodo never it's never like super duper explicit. It's just like, this is this guy's journey through a very hard thing, and in watching that journey and in watching the bravery of him and Sam unfold, you get the point that way, right? Like, just seeing characters do things is enough to say what you need to fucking say, okay?
We're gonna now take a little hike at Mills Mansion.
I love the property. It's gorgeous. It's this big estate on a hill overlooking part of the Hudson, and it just feels like old Hudson Valley. You know, I think a lot of the Hudson Valley feels like, and I love the Hudson Valley now, but there are ways in which its heyday has come and gone. Like, it used to be when the FDR estate was happening. You know, there were all these major old money estates along the river. Like, that's an age that has come and gone for sure, and you can still see pieces of it along the river. And so it's always been a special place to me, and I'm excited to share it.
Excellent. All right, so we're gonna head there now.
Let's take a walk.
Go to Mills. Let's
go to Mills Mansion. Is that what you wanted?
Is that what you wanted?
have a perfect day to walk at Mel's Mansion. I think the first time I was here, I was like 8. And I came sledding with my friend Jake. Shout out Jake. And it's just I've been here in all seasons, I think, at this point over the years. And there's something about it that just makes you think of like old Hudson Valley. Like, this is one of the estates that, like, I don't know if this is true, don't quote me on this. But this is what I'm going to say it confidently. This is one of the estates that like Edith Wharton used to hang out in. And it just blows my mind thinking about, you know, I think the whole county feels like you can feel the spirits of like the last turn of the century. And this just feels like a very magical place. Like, there's a lot of old energy here. And I don't know, it's sort of like a beautiful place in all seasons. Like, it has its own vibe during the fall, and in the summer, everything's blooming.
Wow, holy moly.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
But yeah, you know, this feels like essential Hudson Valley to me. You can see the water, there's this like old money establishment. And I've heard that the actual Joneses used to live around here. The phrase like, oh, whoa. But you know, the Joneses up the way, they would get like all the new appliances, like they had the new stove before everybody else and stuff like that. And so everybody in the estates along the Hudson was trying to keep up with the Joneses, and that's where that phrase comes from. Yeah.
Wow, that's funny.
That's what I've heard. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I tell everybody really confidently. And the first time that I really came here like by myself over the summer and really spent the time to like walk around was right after I graduated college. And there's another park on the other side of the estate. And I was walking through the woods, and there was this like side path leading up to this like old barn. And I was walking through the woods and arrived behind this old barn, and there were all these catering vans there. And so I was like, what the fuck? And so I just walked in and walked into the middle of a wedding, and it just like made me so strangely emotional that I felt like I walked through a portal in the woods to another world where people were just like happy and getting married. And I was sort of in a weird spot, you know, because I think after college graduation, you just have a couple weeks where you're like, oh man, what now, you know? And so that was really cool. So it's always felt like sort of a magical place to me. Around that time when I first graduated from college, I really just wanted to tell stories about my life and stories like inspired by my life. Like, it was really important to me that people know that my life was important, you know. It's very like ego-driven memoir work. And then over the next year or so, I really started to think about, you know, I think there's such a difference between revisiting the times in our life that have traumatized us and telling those trauma stories through memoir or through like, you know, a play about, you know, abuse or whatever. Such a difference between that and telling stories that you would have found interesting or fun or like safe when you were in those parts of your life, you know, like, so it just became more appealing to me to like, what is a story that 7-year-old Sam would be stoked about instead of like telling the story of 7-year-old Sam, you know, like what would be that, escape or comfort that you could give to someone else in the same way that like Jurassic Park was an escape and a comfort to me, you know. In general, the Hudson Valley just felt super magical to me, you know. We moved here when I was 8. Before then I lived in Ohio, and it was like very rural and like lots of concrete, you know, long stretches of like flat highway. And then all of a sudden here, there's all this like lush greenery and forests, and things are alive in a way that they didn't seem to be in Cincinnati. And so this place just feels like a good example of that. The magic of being 8 years old in a new place with like lots of stuff to engage with, you know.
So you grew up in Cincinnati.
I was born in Minnesota and then spent a couple years there that I don't remember because I was like 1 and 2. And then we moved to DC for a couple years. We moved to Ohio when I was 5 maybe, and lived there for a few years, and then moved here when I was 8. So I grew up mostly here, but a few other scattered places.
And what was it? What were those other places like compared to the Hudson Valley?
You know, I mean, I think that to me, Minnesota feels like a well-cultivated place. Like people have really sunk into the ground there in a good way. Like it's well established. I don't know how to explain it. Like it's just very set, you know. And maybe that's because for then most of my childhood after we left, like I only went to Minnesota once or twice a year, right? So it didn't change much, or I didn't notice it changing very much, like every 6 or 8 months. But here it feels like things are changing all the time. There's always new stuff and some things stay the same, but it feels like there's this energy in the Hudson Valley where things like constantly shift and regrow and are reborn. It just feels like every summer here, everything is alive, I guess maybe that's the thing too, that it swings either way very easily. Like in the fall and the winter, like things are very dead and very scarce and very creepy. You know, New York gets very creepy in October. Like October nights, you know, you can just feel like the wind's a little extra windy, you know. But in the summer, everything's the exact opposite. It's full of life. It's so green. It just feels like, I don't know, a place that has energy. And so I think that's really worked its way into a lot of my writing, that things can swing very easily from being very alive to being very spooky and cursed. And I think on a human level, like the only thing that stops us from swinging too far in either direction is us, which is sort of scary. But also just everything in the land is alive, and there are all these like layers of old buildings that have sort of been abandoned or fallen apart, and you know, they're still out there in the woods and they still have energy, and so stuff just, you know, comes out.
The Hudson Valley is known as being a very like energetic and almost paranormal place. Like so many, there are these really famous UFO sightings and abductions that have taken place specifically in the Hudson Valley region. And there is a belief among some groups that this place has energy unlike other places on Earth. Similar to like areas like Skinwalker Ranch, which is not just a small ranch, but a huge area of once native land.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You can feel all that energy. Like it just feels like a haunted place. You drive through Hyde Park, and everywhere you look, there are banners and buildings and roads that all remind you, like, you know, someone famous lived here once. And in a way, that's our defining feature. Like, sorry, Hyde Park. But, you know, it's a lot of those sort of cutesy towns that used to have this, like, shell of, like, upper classness, and it's sort of sunk into the ground in a weird way. Like now we still have like celebrities living around, but they're sort of hidden in the woods. You know, it used to be like, this is where the Mills lived, you know, but now it's like, I hear Peter Dinklage lives around here somewhere, you know.
Right.
Like the energy has just shifted in a weird way.
Do you hold like personal beliefs about energy and the paranormal? Do you believe those things are real?
Yeah, I mean, we all are vibrating at different frequencies all the time. And, you know, people who really talk about energy at a very base level. You know, I think people try to be very articulate when they talk about people that they've just met, and they're like, I don't know, you know, he gave me like this, and, you know, I thought this about him, blah, blah, blah. But then you have people who just say like, I don't know, he had a bad vibe, you know, because we're all just molecules vibrating together. And I think that we can sense each other's frequencies, or, you know, the vibrations vibrating outward. And I think that when you're talking about ghosts and spirits and the energy of a place, like a place that has been vibrated at a certain frequency for too long just feels that way forever, you know, gets sort of tuned into that, like, you know, double murder or whatever. Like I said, a number of times, I came here when I was like in my early 20s and would just sit. And actually, we walked by it, and the bench that I used to sit on is gone now, which is sort of sad. But I used to just sit and look out at the water and write for a while. And I think there was a lot of stuff that I was trying to process just from my life and like college and, you know, a lot of different things, which is why I really wanted to tell stories about my life, and felt like that was super important. And then when I was doing my MFA, and then I was reading a bunch of memoirs, and I was like, this is a bummer. No one who writes a memoir seems to have like a message that they really want to impart. Like they were just telling stories that were, you know, often very sad, and I found not a ton of them very like particularly inspiring or energizing, but I always loved Jurassic Park. And so I started to think of ways that I could say the same kinds of stuff that I wanted to talk about through symbols and metaphors that were within the horror genre. Because it seemed like people had already been doing that for a long time in ways that I like didn't really think of. You know, before I really started paying attention to horror, it was just like, you know, I watched a lot of horror movies, but a lot of them were like silly slashers and things like that. And then every so often you get like an Exorcist or a Midsommar, and you're like, okay, well that horror can be artsy too. But it wasn't until I started reading like Shirley Jackson, Jack Ketchum was another big one when I was in my early 20s. Writers who showed the ways that you could tell a story and have a symbol and have them intersect at a certain point. I wrote because I was just hanging out by myself and wanted to tell stories, and there were other people who did that too. It didn't really occur to me that there were like communities until I started, you know, paying attention, and really publishing more, and understanding what was out there. And then I started to connect to like the horror writers community and things like that, which has just been great. But I think for a long time before then, it was a lot of just like shouting into the void, you know, and not knowing what direction my work was going in. And I was like submitting, you know, these sort of sad stories that weren't selling at all. And then I made my first professional sale off of a horror story. And so I was like, okay, that's clearly the thing. And it's like practically impossible to get a play produced. And so I was writing plays and, you know, writing scripts, and like we weren't really doing plays, or, you know, it was just so difficult. And so I was like, okay, at least I have control over this one thing, and I can do a short story and send it out, and someone else will throw it into a magazine, you know, easy peasy, relatively. I mean,
easy
like,
peasy.
Yeah, hundreds of rejections later, you know. And then it was a long period, like a year of not really getting anything published, which I guess isn't a long period relatively. But a year of like not really getting anything published, and still sort of struggling to figure out what stories I wanted to tell. And then in 2019, all of a sudden, like had a bunch published, and like things were going really well. And then the pandemic hit, and it was like, okay, this is actually like pretty good timing, because I'm at a space where I want to just sit down and like figure out my writing self. You know, I don't write every day. I'm really bad at that. And so I just spent the first year and a half or so of the pandemic just figuring out like how to do it, you know, like how to write every day and what that looked like and what worked for me and what didn't. And then all of a sudden had a summer where I was just like, I figured it out, you know, like I knew my routines and what worked really well and where I would get stuck. And then for a while I was writing like 4,000 words a day. And that was when I like started a PhD program and got the book deal for Edenville, and the PhD program was cutting into the writing. And for a while it was fun because I was like, I have homework. I'm like, I have homework again. I have essays to write. And then I was like not doing the writing, and I was like, this is silly. The only difference is that before, like, I could find homework enjoyable because you have to do it, you know, like. And I was, as an English major, a lot of it was just reading and writing, which I liked anyway. But then I was just like, I don't have to be here, and it was hard to justify being in school after that. So I was in Texas for the PhD program and came back here, and I think just have been so like happy to be back. Like I can't even articulate really why the Hudson Valley means so much to me. But it just feels like, in many ways, a creatively spiritual place. I mean, the Hudson Art School is like a hop, skip, and a jump up the river. And, you know, I guess, you know, you got West Point down that way, and like just think of all the, like, the stuff that like passed through here too to build the city, like the Big Apple, you know, shit. Bricks and concrete and all kinds of shit. It's just crazy to think about, you know? It's like like trying to justify like what is the energy in the Hudson River that feels so great and like helps me feel so creative, and I just don't know what it is, but it feels like a place that has energy and has a productivity to it because there's so much industry and art and like construction and culture, air. You know, there's just so much stuff here in the air.
I mean, rivers are naturally sources of life, you know, and sources of energy flowing down through landscape, terrain. They bring life to them. Life feeds off its waters. There's life brimming within the water itself, as we can see with all these, you know, I'm not even sure what to call these, but we'll call them lilies for now, and that's going to be just fine for us.
Call in, comment, tell us what they are.
Please let us know what these are exactly. We'd love to learn more about where we live, but, you know, this is constantly a flowing source of energy. How could it not be something spectacular? I think, unfortunately, we look at our world and we're just trained to see mundane things. We're trained to see a river, a shore, a house, a tree, and we're not aware of, maybe the way the natives were aware of the fact that these things are sources of true energy, real energy. And so then that leads me to my next question for you, which is, what do you think about creative energy? Do you think it's a tangible thing? Do you think that we all have it? Well, I want to hear your thoughts on creative energy.
I think we do all have it. I think that the Greeks were really onto something. Creative energy, like anything else, is a vibration that you can pay attention to and court. You know, people say that writing is a muscle, and I think that's true. You have to really exercise it, and the more you do it, you know, like that BoJack Horseman quote, right, where was it like a baboon who's running up the hill every day, and he's like, it gets easier, you have to do it every day, that's the hard part, but it does get easier. Like, I can tell when I haven't written for a while, it feels rusty, and it doesn't feel as good, and every so often there are exceptions, you know, you get like an idea and you're like, oh my gosh, I can write this whole story in one sitting, you know. But the practice of it feels rustier over time the less frequent you do it, and I can really tell if I have a good practice going. It just feels easier to sit down and like, okay, I don't have a lot of time today, but I can do 500 words, you know. And so I think that if you pay attention to that energy and that drive to like, I have to do this or, I'll lose it. I need to pay attention to that energy and let it go through me, because I do think that stories are real. I think that stories have substance and everything is real somewhere. I mean, we're all about the multiverse now, right? But I think that our views of the multiverse are still somewhat limited. If we're really talking about the multiverse, there is a universe where everything is happening all of the time simultaneously. I mean, there are countless universes where at every moment I slip off this rock and I fucking die. Like, I'm dead in constant universes all of the time. Every moment I'm dying, right? So there are constant universes that if you have that creative drive and you want to tell stories, there are these worlds that are trying to make themselves known in our world through you. And that's really crazy and really special, Oh, that fish just jumped. That was a big fish that just jumped out of the water. Did you see that?
Yeah,
this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, so I think that everything is real. I think that we're not really making things up so much, but I think that we're seeing other places and other times and other versions of ourselves, other pieces of ourselves, right? Like, all characters are a part of us. And I think that if you're not paying attention to that, the muses stop speaking to you or the genius flies away, because it's like, all right, well, this asshole clearly isn't gonna like allow me to be known through him. And ideas do sort of like go to other people. Like, often, I know a lot of people who do this, who have an idea and then see it somewhere else and are like, well, someone already took that idea, right? That idea already went through someone else. Josh Radnor has this, he was talking about, I don't remember which movie this was, but he wrote a movie in which two characters are arguing about Twilight and whether or not Twilight is literature. It's the 14-year-old girl and the adult guy, and someone read the scene and said to Radnor, wow, you really hate Twilight. What do you have against Twilight? And Radnor was like, I wrote the whole argument. I also wrote,
The other side.
yeah, the 14-year-old girl is also me, which is like so great. It takes so little to make a character feel realistic. Like, no matter who the character is, I think that if you give them a thought that you yourself have had, all of a sudden that character becomes a real person because they're part of you in some other world. So I think that thoughts and feelings are sort of transmutable like that, as part of creative energy. But someone told me that whenever you see owls, because they're guardians to other worlds, you should always have a good intention when you look at an owl. Like,
really?
When you see an owl, you should always be like, I'm going to be productive today, or I'm going to figure out that scene that I can't figure out.
Oh, because they sort of guard these new realities.
Yeah, I suppose.
That you might be able to slip into.
Yeah, I mean, this is very secondhand information. I wouldn't ask me too many hard questions about it.
So my next question for you is, why horror?
Right. Well, you like horror movies, right?
Love horror movies.
Why do you like horror movies?
Because they put me in the most intense and dangerous situations I could ever imagine being in, and I get to survive them, and I get to go through them and feel that sense of that sense of having been close to something, so close to something that was just the worst thing I can imagine, and then it not being real. It's sort of like the thrill of a bad dream.
Yeah.
And just, I don't know, there's something about great horror that just so, it's like the reason we want to get into roller coasters, go to haunted, houses. Like, we want to be pushed to the edges of our safety, and we want to feel like things are unsafe. We want to know what those feelings are like without actually having to, die or get murdered by people. Or
Yeah, I hate actually dying.
it's really not good for your
Your
heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on, and everybody says a different version of that,
Yeah, I don't think it's a necessarily unique take, but
horror is a nice way to exercise those, like I'm a very anxious person, and horror allows you to like hype up that anxiety even more and to get rid of some of it. There's always a catharsis. There's and a lot of Freudian readings of horror and slashers. There's always a penetration or, a penetration frustration or whatever. There's some kind of piercing through that allows you to get rid of some of that anxiety, I'm afraid of most people most of the time anyway. So slashers really appeal to me because it feels like they acknowledge that in a nice way. Like slashers will say, yeah, you should be afraid of other people. They suck, It makes it more palatable and fun to talk about some of the real issues that you want to talk about. If you can say something with giant spiders, instead of just saying it straight out, doesn't that make it more interesting? And if you think about the stories that really endure, their details don't necessarily matter. The essence of the story matters. Stories are about war, death. I think stories that are more specific tend to die out because we forget the specific moments in time that they're talking about. But stories that, if you were writing a story about COVID-19, I think people's interest in it would come in waves. At first, I think people would be like, I don't really want to talk about COVID anymore.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe people would get interested in that story years down the road. And I don't know, we had a lot of 9/11 movies come and go that were specifically about 9/11. But I think an interest in Lord of the Rings, which is just about war, and not any particular war, still, those movies still sort of stick around. Those stories are still being talked about and paid attention to because the essence is universal. And I think that with horror and genre in general, you can tell a story about a werewolf and that's sort of timeless. But if I talk about something that's happening right now, it isn't so much, So I don't know, I just think it's easier and more interesting to boil stories down to their essence. And instead of Trump is evil, blah, 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 just tell a story about a monster,
Do you have a favorite enduring horror story?
Yeah, I think all of Shirley Jackson's stuff, The Lottery, we still talk about The Lottery, 70 years after it was published, because it's universal. That's mob mentality, and the fear of your neighbors turning on you is something that we can always be afraid of. I hope that we don't, but I think that's the point of stories like that, is that we always will in one way or another, because history repeats in its essence, right? So, yeah, The Lottery is a great one. I think all of Shirley Jackson's stuff in general. And Stephen King, too. Surprisingly, his stuff has stuck around for, 50 years now, almost. Carrie came out.
One of my favorite things about, specifically, I really love The Shining.
Yeah.
And the way it sort of captures this terrible anxiety about, can we change? Are we going to be stuck being the people we are? Will our sins forever follow us?
Yeah.
Or can we be better? And, you know, it doesn't matter to me at all that it takes place in a certain time period, you know.
Right.
You can tell it's maybe got some sort of 1970s sort of vibe to it.
Yeah.
Maybe. But that's hardly invasive while you're reading it. It really is about this timeless anxiety of people being terrified that they are forever a drunk, forever an angry person. And
Yeah.
you know, in the story, it comes true for Jack. He is, you know, stuck being that person, but he does one great thing, which is save his son from it.
Right.
Which is not what happens in the movie. The book is different. So let's talk about your aspirations. You know, where you first got this idea that you could write a book at all, and what that process was like. Deciding, no, I can totally do this. You know, because a lot of people, my goal is to not just reach people in a way that shows them that they don't need to worry, that they can be at peace, but also I want to empower them. I want to empower people to see that they can do whatever it is they set their minds to. They just have to sort of be at peace about it and see what it is that they're drawn to, see what it is that they really excel at, and honor that, you know?
Yeah.
Not everyone is an author, not everyone is a filmmaker or a musician or a singer. And I do believe there's a very long process that a journeying human being has to go through to sort of discover themselves. I myself, I started doing acting, and then I moved from there to you know, making videos and shorts and doing directing. And it's been such a long journey trying to find out, you know, what it is that I love, what it is that I feel called to.
Yeah.
And I feel as though I finally landed in that place. And I'm so joyous, but it took so much hard exploration, hard rejection, and a lot of risk taking to get here. So I want to hear about what your experience was.
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction between wanting to make stuff and making stuff. You know, I think that people really struggle because they don't get itchy if they don't make stuff.
Get itchy. Explain that.
Like, if I don't write for a few days, I feel bad, and I get mad at people, and I, like, you know, lash out. In the same way, you know, if I eat unhealthily for a few days, or I don't exercise, or anything like that, you're missing some part of your endorphins, or, you know, I don't know, what helps you breathe and what helps you feel good. Like, writing just helps me feel good. There are a lot of times when it's hard, and you don't want to do it, and it sucks. And, you know, I've started saying, when people ask me for advice, like, what's your advice for a new writer? I'm like, don't do it. If you haven't started writing yet, don't start now. Like, it's so hard. It's such a pain in the ass. But if I don't do it, I just get upset. I feel upset in my body. I just don't feel good. And that's always been true. Like, for my whole life, if I haven't written something in any form or like created something, I just don't feel good.
Sorry, go ahead. But I was just going to say, what do you think that is? Is that a fear of missing out? Is it a fear of falling behind? Or do you think it's a general sort of like, this is part of what I do and who I am, and when I don't do it, that drives me crazy?
Yeah, I think that it is just a part of who I am. And I think that people who don't feel that way, it's just not a part of who they are. And I think that that's why a lot of people who try to be creative or who want to be creative really struggle, because you're just like, how can I like do this and stay on top of it? And people who really push to be creative don't like have that as much or in the same way, you know. Like I started writing stories when I was like 5 and I couldn't even write. I would do the pictures and then my mom would write the words. Like I would dictate to her the story that I couldn't even like fully read or write on my own. Got a Skeeter there, but
Not anymore.
no more. So yeah, I don't know. I think that it is just a part of who you are. And I think that, you know, too, there's an element of being chosen to do certain things. And you feel like, you know, like you said, you feel like you found the thing that is the thing that you're supposed to do, or one of the things that you're supposed to do, right? And how can you tell? Like, how do you know? Like, I don't even know if horror is the thing that I really want to do. Like, I have all these stories in mind for this world that I want to tell, but in theory, I could tell all those stories by the time I'm like, you know, I'm almost 30 now. By the time I'm like 45, I could be all done with that. And then I have like, hopefully, you know, many more decades, like 3-ish more decades where I'm like, okay, now what? Now what stories do I tell? You know, now do I write that memoir that I wanted to write? Or like, now what do I do? You know, so I don't know. I think it just flows.
It's a good question. You know,
Yeah.
How do we know when we're doing the thing we're supposed to be doing? And I think the whole supposed to be part is not really relevant at all. I would say that it's either aligning or it's not. You're getting up and doing it because you feel compelled to do so, or you're not.
Yeah.
I've stopped and started a bunch of different creative projects in my time. I'm just going to do this so it's not awkward.
Yeah.
I've stopped and started a bunch of creative projects in my life, like writing. I started several different books that I wanted to finish, or short stories, and it was all fun, but I never felt this compelling feeling inside to follow it through. And I know that feeling. I've felt that feeling before. I've done it before with other projects. And so there's this sort of like allowing, you know, you allow yourself to not be something. You allow yourself to not be a writer, right? Or to be a chef. You know, I feel like you've got to explore this world and find those things that, yes, you might realize how special and important it is, how cool it is to write a story. But does that mean that you're the story writer? And you've got to be honest with yourself, because if you force yourself down these paths of creativity, you're going to just upset yourself and drive yourself crazy, and you'll be missing out on the thing that you are actually brilliant at, which could be anything that you can imagine. So I think it's less about, what did we say? Supposed to, right, like we said, supposed to be doing, and more of what am I allowing myself to let go of?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. Like if you're pushing yourself every day to get up and like play guitar, or you're like, well, I should, like I used to study pottery, like pottery, but poetry would work too. You know, I used to study whatever form of art it is, and now I have to do that form of art. Like I really want to do this thing, and you're pushing to do it every day, and it just doesn't feel good. Then what's the point, right? Like even if it's a pain in the ass and I have to remember to like do my 500 words every day, it still feels good after I do it. It's like an exercise, right? Which is why I think people talk about it like a muscle. Like if I get on the elliptical and I haven't done that in a week, I feel like ass. You know, I can't breathe well. I'm like, God, I can tell that I haven't done this. But if I do it regularly, by the like 3rd or 4th day that I've done it in a row, you know, it just feels a lot better. And writing is the same way, you know, and it ebbs and flows, and you have to be okay with that, because there are days that are pretty good and you feel really good about what you've written and the energy is really going for you. But if you're following the energy, you have to be okay with the days that are not great as well, because that's the energy, you know. And I think you have to really pay attention to the way you feel, because often the world might be feeling the same way. You know, if we're all one and we're all vibrating together, then you are part of a vast machine. The full scope of which we will probably never understand. And because there's no way that it's just like, you know, if you don't, you know, pray every day, then fuck you for eternity. Like, there's no way that's the answer. Sorry. But whatever the answer is, it's so far beyond us. And I think that you just have to be okay with that. And I think if you have a day, like even today, I had writer's block. I was working on a scene and I had sort of the base idea, but I was like, I want to make this more interesting. I want to make this more cool. And I can't quite figure it out yet. But that's because I'm not supposed to until later. And I think that that's the supposed to you should be listening to. If you're going to pay attention to any supposed to, pay attention to the supposed to, where you're like, okay, if I didn't come up with that idea today, I wasn't supposed to. And it'll come to me at a time later. And I've done that a lot with like revisiting stories that I love. Like I'll have a short story idea and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. And I feel bad putting it down, but it's not talking to me, you know? And then months later or years later, I'll rewatch an old movie and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is the idea. I see how they did it and now I understand. And it was, you know, because I wasn't supposed to, or I wasn't ready to do it yet.
So there's this sort of element of, you know, as an artist, learning to let go.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to be able to say, okay, I can't do it right now for whatever reason. I'm going to just let it be.
Yeah.
And allow things to flow to you. You know, I think there's this sort of myth that we have as creatives that it's always coming from us deep inside. We're so creative and it's always coming out right through our eyes and mouth. And, oh, I just can't, you know, stand it. I got to get it out right now. And yes, that happens. There are flow states like that. But there's the opposite state, which is the time to stop, to be at peace, to observe.
Yeah.
To let go of this idea that you have to be this constant creative machine and to just be quiet. Just be quiet. Just be where you are.
Yeah,
because watch.
Right, and pay attention. You know, creativity, like anything else, requires fuel. You know, if you're exercising and you feel like you can't do any more without getting more electrolytes and protein in your body, creativity works the same way. If you're feeling stuck, don't keep pushing it. You need to do something that refuels you. You need to go see a movie by yourself or go for a long walk by yourself. You know, I think that most creative refuelings are kind of singular activities. But if you feel refueled by hanging out with your friends or doing something with them or creating something with them, you know, even just playing a game, that's great too. But also try to pay attention to, like I said, taking a walk by yourself, or what's a story that you get something out of, that means something to you, or that, you know, has something to say that's similar to what you're trying to say in your story, and revisit that and see what it's saying to you now. Stories to us change all the time because we change constantly. So, yeah, I think pay attention to the way that you're changing as well. Because something that works for one creative project won't necessarily work for every creative project that you do after that one, right? You could have 3 different creative projects in a row that require 3 different approaches, each one more frustrating than the last. But any creative will say that, especially, you know, writers swim through a deep, like, sea of murk of just material and endless false starts and false scenes and stuff that's wrong. And you just have to sort of swim through it and stick to it until you reach land that you can finally map. You know, about halfway through a first draft of anything, like the first half, I will always, like, just, I don't know what this is. And then I always reach a point halfway through, hopefully, where I realize, like, okay, here's what we're doing, and then I can follow it through. But I think pay attention to the ways in which that's true for you in your own work, whatever it may be. If you're writing stories or writing a book or poetry or painting or whatever, like, just be okay being lost for a little while. And pay attention to what adults say too. You know, people who are over 40 say the same thing about being young. It's okay to be lost for a while. And it's okay to not know what you're doing. And I think that not enough people pay attention to it because it seems to be the common theme of like every movie, right? Is like, don't worry about it, just chill out, everything will work out. Even Lord of the Rings. I mean, Gandalf says that all the time, right? Don't worry about it. It was supposed to happen this way. Just be chill. And, you know,
these are the themes of my favorite films and my favorite stories. They're about us realizing we had it within us the whole time. We had it within us the whole time, and we just had to trust and let go.
yeah.
And I think the myths and legends of our time and past times knew all that.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, people forget that because that's sort of a cliche now, right? It all works out in the end. Everything you needed was always inside of you, but that's a cliche for a reason, you know? And creative people say that too. Like, everything you need to tell your story is already inside of you. Or if it isn't, like, it will be soon, you know? Just be patient. I feel like sometimes the bullshitty way to say that is like, trust the process. But it's true too.
But that, you know, and I think that's where we started with this, is like, there is a process of getting lost. How
Yeah.
can you become victorious within yourself? How can you understand and love yourself if you don't first hate yourself? If you don't first despise the fact that you don't feel capable, you don't feel strong enough, you don't feel creative enough. How can you possibly come to the point of being a victorious person within and without if you haven't first been lost deep in the woods of your own soul?
Yeah, if you you can't get to know yourself if you haven't first not known yourself, right? So I think, and people say the same thing about being in your 20s. You know, you have a chance to figure out who you are, and by the time you figure that out, you know, hopefully you emerge into your 30s, and you know, people say about your 30s, that's where it's at, baby. Like, you know what you're about.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that in a way becoming true for me as I stare down 30. But I think that creation works the same way. You have to be okay not knowing something for a while, and novels are hard that way because you spend a long time not knowing it. You know, a short story, 20 pages? It can take you years, but it's still a pretty condensed amount of stuff to be lost in. The swamp is much smaller, but you have to be okay with any larger projects to be in that swamp for a longer time. And that's where a lot of people get stuck and stop. And they're like, well, I can't do this. But you can. I think anybody can do anything. I think that when nice people get hit in the head and all of a sudden kill their entire family, that sort of proves my point in a negative way, but like...
I mean, you are a horror writer, so it works.
Yeah, like the only thing standing in our way is us, and there may be external factors as well. You know, if you have a very intense day job or a very demanding home life or whatever it may be, that's all fair, and that may very well stand in your way enough to keep you from creating. But if you have that push and the itch, you will find a way. And I think that you just have to be patient with that, because a lot of people will talk about trying to be one with the moment, and then they'll feel sad about the stuff that, you know, happened earlier today. They're like, the stuff that happened earlier today is also part of this moment. So you have to be one with that if you're going to be one with the moment, you know?
This is why I'm pushing for people to understand and embrace meditation in a modern way, because it's not this, just this one practice that's a very specific practice, and it was made in some foreign country, and it's kind of hard, and people like to talk about it as if they do it, but it's it's kind of inaccessible. It's not. It is something that you can do at any moment, at any time, while you're walking, while you're with other people, talking to people. It is just being where you are and letting all of the things that want to interrupt that, like your thoughts, your thoughts telling you, I can't, this sucks, just letting those go, just watching them go. And that's really some of my best creative work has been, for example, just writing without stopping to think about whether or not this writing's any good. And suddenly I've got 1,000 words on the page, and I didn't stop and correct every single one of them. I'll go back and do that later. I'll take care of that later. But right now I'm just letting it out, and I'm not letting my thoughts interrupt me. That's meditation. You're there with your fingers tapping on those keys and filling out this page, and you're having fun, and you're not letting those thoughts invade and take over the process. You and the process are one. And even the feeling of being lost is a feeling to be enjoyed and to be savored. That's meditation.
Creation is always meditation. And remember, it's always you. You're not accessing, something outside of you. Something is coming through you and into whatever you're creating, and you're just there to watch it happen. And meditation is the same thing. You're just there to breathe and be aware of your body in space. And being aware of an idea in space works the same way.
I wanted to continue this talk about you being an author. So when was the point where you said, I'm gonna be an author, I'm writing books?
That's a good question. I think it really hit last year after I sold the first novel. I didn't even know I could write a novel. That felt like sort of a white whale to me. I had written a lot of short stories, but even as a kid, as a 12-year-old, I would start stories all the time, and I found it really satisfying to be making something on my dad's desktop computer, the big bulky, like glass monitor, and the big keyboard. It just felt nice to sit there after school and you could feel in the clackety keyboard that you were making something. But it wasn't until after I got the book deal for Edenville that I was like, okay, I need to actually sit down and finish this, right?
But you'd written short stories before they got published.
Right, but it wasn't until the novel that I was like, okay, this is going to be like a book, This is going to be like a whole novel with my name on it, So was this always in the back of your mind that one day I'll do that? Yeah.
And you were what, intimidated by it? Were you excited by it?
I think a bit of both. It was exciting to feel that I could do it once I hit the point where I was like, okay, I'm far enough into the process now that I think this is actually something that I can pull through. But at first I was very intimidated, and I had a lot of pieces of chapters that I would, instead of writing a through line, I would just be like, okay, well, let me just do this piece over here today. I didn't know that I could write a novel until I was sort of already done with the first one, or nearing completion on the first one. And I guess now that you mention it, I never really knew what exactly I wanted to write. I wrote plays for a while, and that was fun, but it's so hard to get a play produced. And I just wanted stuff out there. I wanted to be sharing stories with people, because that felt like sort of the point, I spent a lot of time just by myself as a kid, and I wanted people to see what it was like in my head, to share that, and to get people as jazzed about this stuff as I was, this made up monsters and whatever else.
So was your first love theater?
Yeah, I was a theater kid from like 8 through 24 or so. I did plays all the time, from acting to directing, and like, I did lighting design and shit. I did all kinds of stuff. And I liked it a lot, but I hit a point where it was like, acting is not what I've ever really focused on. Like, I like performing, but acting itself, like, thinking about the Stanislavski method or whatever was never really my jam. Writing was always my jam. So I think that's how I really started to transition into prose, because I hit a point where I was like, okay, if I continue acting as an adult instead of just like performing in college, I really got to pay attention to like what my characters want.
Right.
And there was an element of that made me feel like I was going insane, because I was really trying to figure myself out. And then for every show, you shove yourself out of your head and shove somebody else in. And so you're still like pushing back, figuring out who you are, like a few months at a time. Every time you're in a show, you're like, okay, well, forget Sam. I'm Danny now, or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm sure trained actors would say, well, that's not quite the way to do it. You incorporate yourself. But the point is that you got to a point where it was like, I'm either going to take this more seriously and figure out how to make it work,
right,
or I'm going to let it go.
Yeah. So I think, finding whatever you take seriously, because I think that we all, even if you're the nicest, most accepting person, there are things where you're like, I don't want to do that, or like you poo-poo that, and then things that you're really interested in. So I think just paying attention to what you're really interested in, because you could be talented at a lot of different things, and you could feel yourself pulled in a lot of different directions, right? But figuring out what really gets you jazzed, like what gets you really excited. And nothing gets me more excited than figuring out like a really good story, So, yeah, I don't know. But you had similar things with acting, right? I mean, you left acting for similar reasons, I feel like.
For sure. I just didn't understand that. I kept pushing against that feeling. I kept wanting, I'm like, no, I'm an actor. No, I'm an actor. But then so often I'd be confronted with evidence to the contrary. Everyone else in the play would be working harder than I was to figure out their character.
Yeah.
Everybody else would be taking notes. They would be, really taking it very seriously, and I wasn't. Mm-hmm. And at first I attributed that to a sort of lackadaisical, like, I can do whatever. I'm really great. I'm so talented.
Yeah, and their characters are more complicated.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'm just the judge or the priest or whatever. I'm a pretty simple guy.
So I fought against this idea that I wasn't being an actor, and I kept myself in it. And then I think it was acting with my wife, Kristen, when we did Pride and Prejudice. I saw how important it was to her to do such an incredible job, and I didn't feel the same way.
Yeah.
And I realized then, like, oh, I'm not an actor. I act. I have a great time. I'm a lot of fun, and it's a great time. But ultimately, I feel like there are other things I'd rather be doing with my time. I noticed I'd get frustrated a lot, and feel like I'd rather be home doing something else. Or at the time, I was trying to write, And meanwhile, she ate it up. She just couldn't get enough of rehearsal, couldn't get enough of diving into her character and understanding. So, and then I realized, sparking off that from her, I saw everyone else around me that really cared about this, trying to do a great job and being anxious over it, but ultimately it being their focus. And I wasn't that person. And I let it go. I finally let it go. And which is great, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now had I still been like, no, I'm an actor. I'll figure it out,
Yeah, but people push that. People push that for years and for years, try to be like, well, this is the thing that I'm doing, right? Or this is like what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing, right?
It was the first thing I did. It was literally the first thing I was born, went to school, and then I found out I was in theater arts. And I excelled at it. Why? Because I have good energy, I'm personable, several different reasons come together. My dad and my mom's a news reporter, my dad's charismatic. Of course I'm going to be great in front of crowds.
Yeah.
But it was the first thing I did that I was good at. And I was like, well, that's it. We're done here. Which is crazy. And it's, it really is. Letting go of it was this fear of getting lost.
Sure.
I was unable to let go of it, because if I let go of it, then who the hell am I?
Right.
And then you'll find out. But, it's terrifying.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, that I think even if your greatest fears come true, or you stop doing, or you lose the thing that you thought defined you, you will still find out who you are. Because again, who you are is constantly changing. And I used to have this weird anxiety where I would leave my room for a short trip, even if I was spending the night somewhere else. And I would look around at my bedroom and I would think, I will never see this room again. I will never see this room again. Even after this night, I will be a different person coming back into this room, And there are small ways in which that's always true. Like, even if it's just a sleepover at a friend's house, right? Like, because I had this anxiety even when I was like 13. You see a movie that you haven't seen before, something changes for you, and when you come back, you are a different person, and that's true every day. Like, even today, I was like, okay, well, I'm excited and I'm like nervous. I hope this goes well, but it'll be fun, whatever. Like, I will not have that feeling again, right? Like, that me will be gone. And so paying attention to that in a creative context is really important too, because ideas will work the same way, right? Like, that was a big anxiety that I had with Edenville. Initially, I really wanted to tell this like sort of melancholy story about this relationship falling apart. And I got so bored of it so many times, because I really liked my two main characters and I liked where they were going emotionally, but there was no plot that was bringing them there. And then I had this other character who had a really great villain, and I really liked this character and the villain that was sort of attached to her, but her plot wasn't really going anywhere either. And then I had this like other plot with no characters or anything else, and I was like, let me mush these three together. And so a lot of the elements of those pieces got lost in trying to thread them into one solid, through line. And so I really mourned those pieces for a long time. I was like, I'm doing this story a disservice. This isn't what I meant it to be. And, this isn't like even my book. This isn't even like fully representative of my work or what I want and, what I want to share to people or share with people.
How many years was that sort of lost mishmash?
It's like about, the idea that I had for the villain was in like November of 2017. And then in January of 2018, I had the nightmare that really inspired the world of Edenville. So about 5.5 years from like first conception to publication of the novel, almost 6 years.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And we're just so, as a society, we're so caught up in this idea that our creative process should be like this. Every week, should be another video. Every week should be another thing.
Because that's how long our memory is. We're like constantly content is being dropped that we're just like, Mission Impossible 2 was a huge blockbuster movie, and now it's like, oh shit, the new Mission Impossible came out? Like, it's just lost in the wash of other content. I mean, even the books that are released in a year is just astronomically high.
Yeah.
Like, it's just insane.
And it sort of all becomes meaningless at that rate. It really does, because people come to me, they're like, did you see X TV show or whatever it is? And I'm like, no. And as soon as I see it, which is the next week, they already forgot about it, and they can't remember things from it. And I'm like, oh, I'm watching that scene where, and they're like, I don't remember. So it didn't even matter anyway.
And we had that, right? You're like, oh, The Bit in the Troop by Nick Cutter. And I was like, sure.
Great book, by the way. Lots of fun. Great job, Nick.
Yeah.
But Nick, buddy. No, Mr. Cutter. Please, Mr. Cutter was my father. Captain Cutter.
Oh my God.
But, yeah, right. We're it's sort of just like this constant motion of content that as soon as it's gone, the next thing's in and the next thing's in, and it's already left our brain. Yeah. And so then you this is where I wanted to take this question to you, which is, what's the point for you? What is what is the point for you of creating and writing stories? Do you think there is a point, or do you think it's just an expression, you know?
Yeah, I think for me, we've said this a couple different ways, but you learn something from every story that you absorb. Even if it's a really stupid, you're like, God, I hated that book or whatever. You learn something from it. You get something out of it. Which I guess is the same as like talking to strangers. You know, if you meet a stranger out and about and they're like not interesting enough that you're like, can I get your phone number or something? You know, like let's remain friends or whatever. It's still, you're interacting with someone out there and learning something. So I think that my point, please. I think the point in writing Edenville and presenting this world is preserving, like a couple different things, like preserving the Hudson Valley that I love, because the book is set in like a spooky Hudson Valley, and a lot of that magic and mystery and like eeriness that I felt as an 8-year-old really comes through in the book in a fun way. And I think that my point in it also is just to bring light to the types of stories that I don't see as much anymore. You know, we don't really see the adventurous romp done well anymore. I think that maybe those books are still around, but as far as like big movies go and big stories, it doesn't seem like that's really a thing currently. Like The Mummy and Jurassic Park and The Goonies, those were all stories that were really special to me as a kid, you know, like Atlantis, you know, getting to go on an adventure and see things and experience peril and beauty. And, you know, The Lord of the Rings fits in that category as well. I'm rewatching The Lord of the Rings, which is why I'm thinking about it a lot.
Great series to rewatch, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Tolkien went through a very similar process. He spent like 12 years figuring out the world and telling the story of the Lord of the Rings. And when that was done, he was like, okay, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, what I really want to tell is this other stuff. And the whatever, I don't know, yell at me in the comments about how I pronounce this wrong, but the Silmarillion.
The Silmarillion, I think?
Yeah, the Silmarillion. You know, he died before he got to finish that. And that was some of the stuff that he was really excited to tell. So, yeah, I think just sharing this world that I think is beautiful and dangerous and eerie, and bringing that awareness of the space to more people. And I think eventually there's a conservation element to that too. You know, if we can continue making the woods seem like a magical place, then hopefully we can stop cutting it down, you know, because that is a big anxiety that I have now, you know, thinking about this world and thinking about my own version of the cinnamon raisins.
The cinnamon raisin bagels.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, well, what if, you know, the fourth novel comes out in like 2027 or whatever, right? How much of the Hudson Valley is going to be underwater? You know, and how much can we talk about that kind of thing before it's too late? That really freaks me out. And so I think that bringing some of that appreciation for the land and just showing how rich the land itself can be is a part of it too. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different points.
Right, but I'm detecting, you know, like these very personal, you might almost call them just like small, you know, self-generated sort of, you know, concerns and thoughts that you're saying, these are worth hearing and I'm going to put them out, and anybody who wants to hear them can talk to me about them and can enjoy them. But, you know, obviously every one of us wants to figure out how we can change the world, you know?
Yeah, and guide future iterations of people, right? Like, I hear a lot of writers say, you know, I just wanted to, and filmmakers and all kinds of creatives say the same thing. I just wanted to make something that I would have been stoked about in high school. When you're really trying to find your way and you're figuring out who you are and you're changing all of the time the most that you'll ever change, right? Your body's constantly changing, your voice and your personality. Like when you're 17, you're just in constant flux and like constantly on the edge of like, you're applying to colleges. You don't need that, like, I didn't even have a concept of what that meant, you know? Or like what college was really, like what that life would be. And so I think giving future you a story that they can turn to as a comfort or an escape or a tool to learn something from is important. And in a way, it's almost the same as having children, because you're like, you know, putting out another you or a ripple into the universe that is saying like, here's how I think about stuff.
All right, so we're back from Mill's Mansion. That was so beautiful. It really was just like a spectacular piece of land. You know, just sloping, beautiful hills and that river. And is that the river? I was looking at the Hudson, right? We're on the Hudson.
I think so. Yeah. Yell at us in the comments about how we're wrong. But
please.
It was a gorgeous day for it. I mean, it's been hard to have summer adventures this year because it's been abnormally rainy and smoky, you know, from the Canadian wildfires. But it was a nice day today. I think we got our fair share of mosquito bites and sweating. It was just great. It was just a good time.
I had a great time. Thanks so much for doing that, man.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. That was a blast.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Where are you going to go next?
I don't know. When the next book comes out, you know, or actually we'll probably do another interview after the release.
Great.
You know, if that sounds good, and hopefully we can hike somewhere else.
Yeah, in a year and a half when the second one comes out.
Yeah. It'll move faster than we think it will, though.
Will it, Michael?
Do you have anything you want to say about the book?
No, October 3rd, you can get it wherever books are sold. It's available on Barnes & Noble. It's available on Amazon. You can get it on hardcover, digital, or audiobook. It'll come out in paperback next year, I believe. So if you don't want the hardcover, just hold tight. It will have a map of the world in it, which I think is always fun, always a good sell. And
the UK, when's that dropping?
I think the UK one comes out on October 9th. So if you live in the UK and you're looking, I think it'll just be in paperback on October 9th. Or maybe the 6th.
Really cool
this
cover.
Gorgeous
I
cover.
love this cover. I mean, both covers are gorgeous, but the blood spider over the house is, I don't know. That's awesome.
I mean,
think
look
at
at
this. It's got Jurassic Park lettering as well. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the difference too. Like, this is the really literary, like, horror, you know, older cousin, and this is the scrappy, zany, younger cousin. And they're the same book, but it vacillates vibes throughout.
This one, you trust me, I would be at 17, even younger, and into my 20s. I'd be seeing this in an airport and buying this immediately.
Great.
As soon as I saw this cover, I would be like, "Oh, I'm in. I'm so fucking in."
You got blood spiders?
Blood spiders? We're done. Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, thank you for having me, man. This is super fun.
I'm so glad we got to do this, man.
Me too.
So thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you at the next interview with Sam Rebelein.
Drive safe.
Hi guys, so today I am joined by Sam Rebelein.
Hello everybody.
Sam is the horror author and novelist of...
I am, the one. Nobody else.
Let's try that again.